Hello everybody. Today we will be studying the Najdorf in this game between Karpov and Kasparov during their World Championship match in 1985. The game starts with the regular e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4. Until now all the moves are natural, they're the standard what we all know. Alright, so here he plays e6, castle kingside, bishop b7. Until now, nothing too special, right? Here Karpov decides to play the move king h1. This move isn't that strange. It really makes quite a lot of sense. The bishop, the dark squared bishop here, it's not very clear where we want to develop it. And it's also not very clear where we want to develop this bishop, right? Maybe it goes here, maybe it goes here. Karpov is keeping his options open with king h1. This is a very useful move because oftentimes this diagonal can be used. So Kasparov plays queen c7 here. Again, not the most spectacular move. Knight c6 was an option, of course, but maybe he didn't want to play something like this, you know? Okay, so he plays queen c7, keeping things complicated, keeping the tension. Here Karpov decides to play a4. This move prevents any possible b5s. It's really annoying for black, but it also limits some of white's possibilities. Not only is he wasting a tempo playing a4 that he could be using to attack the king side, but he's also weakening squares like b4. So here there are many options. Nowadays what is popular is b6. If you think about it, this move makes a lot of sense, as we will soon see, because our bishop is destined for this long diagonal. Why? Well, white's plan basically revolves around playing g4 at some point and attacking the king side. And if white doesn't play that, he really doesn't have many attacking options, many active options. So b6 makes a lot of sense right here. We are stopping a potential a5, and we're allowing our bishop to go to b7. The win rate in this is under 50%, so it's actually positive for black. However, Kasparov plays knight c6. This is also a good move. It is defending a5, and it's developing a piece. Normal. Karpov plays bishop e3 here. And Kasparov plays rook e8. This is not your average move. It is not very clear why we're playing this move, right? It's not very clear where this rook is supposed to be going. Why are we not developing our pieces? So let's start from the beginning. Alright, why didn't we not play b6? Move makes a lot of sense, right? We said we want to develop. Unfortunately here, knight takes c6, queen takes, and bishop f3 cause problems for us. There is no way to stop e5, and we are going to be losing. If not material, we're going to be losing, like, positional advantages here. What other options are there? Well, there is bishop d7. Now, this move is quite interesting. It's not very often that it's played, but it is interesting. So basically, what we want to do is we want to take on d4, and we want to play bishop c6. If you, as white, if you have played the Najdorf or openings similar to this, you know that this is a very common theme. And there are many options white can play. White can play knight b3, looking to play a5 here. In which case we would probably play b6, stop this. Bishop f3, and then something along the lines of rook a e8 or rook a d8, just to get out of the way. And here after g4 there are options again. Bishop c8 is an interesting option here, trying to reroute the bishop. The engine finds moves like h6, moves like d5. You might try to play them, but they really aren't things that you will see during a chess game, right? Most obvious thing to play is bishop c8, and against g5 you play knight d7, and you're fighting this position. This is a fighting position. Another option here is the favored by the engine, knight takes d4. Personally, I am not a great fan of this move. The engine says that after e5, white is fine, but I honestly think like this isn't the most interesting position to play as black. I know it's good. It's pretty good, but it's also not very interesting. You don't have the tactical tension that you had before. So bishop d7 is an option, but here Kasparov plays rook e8, and this one it's not so obvious why he plays this, right? Um, well, pretty much the bishop wants to go to f8. This is a good square for the bishop. E5 at some point or d5 might be played, in which case we want to have this rook on e8. And well, we also don't really have a lot of moves to be playing here, right? Bishop d7 doesn't threaten anything too concrete. Rook e8 is fine. So here, Karpov plays bishop f3. So again, b6 not possible because of e5 or stuff around that. Bishop d7 is not the greatest thing because now we have knight b3 threatening to play a5, and if we play b6, well, our rook is sort of like in the way. It's being indirectly attacked. So here he can play g4, and if we play bishop c8, again, this is playable. It's just not the most ideal thing. So here, Kasparov plays rook b8, right? What about g4? What about g4? So the main point of g4 here is that after knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, knight d7, White's attack is not really thriving. Black is going to play b5. He's going to get some counterplay. And White's counterattack is not very clear. You know, pieces have been exchanged. e5 is looming around the corner. b4 is looming around the corner. Black is fine. So what Karpov does is he waits. He plays queen d2. Here he's waiting. He's like, okay, well, Kasparov doesn't really have many moves to play, many great moves. So I'm just going to wait with queen d2. And whenever he plays bishop d7, which is what he played, now I will have the chance to play g4 at some point, because he will have to waste a tempi bringing the bishop back to move the knight to d7. And this is exactly what happened. Knight b3 played, threatening a5. Kasparov played b6. It's a simpler move. It's flexible. It keeps the dynamic tension in the board, right? If as black, even though we are slightly worse, we play the Sicilian because we want to win. So moves like b6, even if they are not the most precise from the computer's point of view, they are still practically really good because they give white chances to lose, to make mistakes. So here Karpov plays g4. It is likely that this was preparation, since it has been played more than 200 times before. Bishop c8, g5, knight d7. Alright, bishop c8 might not seem like the most obvious move, but given what we have talked about, right, that the natural diagonal for the bishop is here, that the bishop on d7 really isn't doing much, that the knight needs to get out of there, bishop c8 makes sense. G5, knight d7, queen f2 played by Karpov. This is an interesting move. It puts pressure on this pawn, which is quite uncomfortable, and it allows for perhaps the rook to develop. It allows some f5s. Right now f5 cannot be played because it weakens this square too much, but in some future this might be interesting. Kasparov plays bishop f8. Interesting. Why not bishop b7? This seems more natural. Well, the point is that we don't need to play bishop b7 immediately. In fact, bishop f8 is slightly better, if you can believe that. After bishop f8, white can play h4, in which case we would have to play something around the lines of knight a5 here, trying to get the knight here. If the knight gets to c4, then we might be looking at interesting counterplay. Knight d4, knight c4, bishop c1, bishop b7, and this position becomes really complex. Another thing that could be played is bishop b7 straight away, after which white will play h5, and we have reached a position that is extremely difficult for black. This position is not easy in the slightest. White has many moves here. He can be considering h6, you have to be careful about g6, and g6 might not be strong right now, but you have to be careful about it. White has options, to say the least. He can simply play bishop g2, he can develop the rook, pass it all the way here, and you as black, it's not so clear what you're gonna play here. At some point you're gonna want to break with d5, but when? So a move that would make sense to try and free yourself is knight e7. This move is quite plausible. There are options for white again. h6 is one of them. It is quite scary. Here you can play it in several ways. You can try and play knight g6. This one is sort of like the safe option, right? Because white doesn't gain anything from taking. f5 is probably never going to be a possibility since it opens up the long diagonal. So you really have like flexibility in this position. Okay, knight e7 is interesting. What about knight d4, right? You take the knight away from c6, it's no longer defending d4, a knight jumps right straight through. Okay, now you are forced to play an active move because white is going to suffocate you if you don't do anything, right? You your pieces are all the way in the back, you need a breakthrough. In this case, it comes from the move e5. It's not the prettiest move, considering that it gives up d5 and f5 and it opens up this diagonal. But you have to do something or else you will be suffocated simply by the fact that white has more space than you. So, f takes e5, knight takes e5. Here, white has several options. The computer suggests queen g3, but I think bishop g2 is more natural. And here, as black, you also have options, right? You can play d5 right now, which is a good moment to play d5 actually, very natural. Or you can try and regroup with the queen and play queen c8 to pass it all the way here. Knight g4 is not possible because it's queen takes, of course. So d5, okay, this is an interesting move. After which white will try and attack through here, and we have a complicated dynamic position. Here white will not take this pawn because he does not want this diagonal to open. So he will try to delay that as much as possible. He will play something like queen g3 or something along the lines of that, and we have a very complicated tactical position. Had Karpov chosen to play h4, he could have been putting real problems onto black right here. It's not easy to play this move, this position. Instead of that, Karpov plays bishop g2. He has a different plan, perhaps a more elegant plan, but not a better plan. So Kasparov just plays bishop a7 here, normal. Rook a d1. He plays g6 here. This is an interesting situation in the game. g6 did not have to be played. There were some options, but it makes sense, right? Because what else are you going to play in this position? The computer suggests moves like bishop a8, moves like queen c8, and these moves honestly have no active plan. They're just waiting. They're minimally improving the queen, right? This queen is looking at some possibilities in the future on queen c8. But for a human to play that is very difficult. That's why Kasparov played g6. We're trying to activate the position. I don't know, bishop g7, f5 at some point, f6 or something like that. It's possible, right? Here you might be wondering, well, didn't I just give white a humongous pawn lever? And the truth is that no, because again, white does not want to open this diagonal. I mean, if this diagonal is opened, then the white king will be the one that is weak, not the black king. In case of f5, black will happily just play knight e5, and he will be in a commanding position. Well, not in a commanding position, but in a fine position. You don't have to worry too much about this. f5 again is an option, but it's not what you want to play as white. You want something a bit more clear. Here again, Karpov had h4. It makes a lot of sense, right? Whenever the pawn is fianchettoed in this way, h4 is usually the way to go. Here, maybe Karpov was worried about an f5, a potential f5, but this isn't really threatening. h5 will still be played, and you will still weaken black. But what I think happened is that Karpov had a plan in his mind, and he thought it was really good. which is the following. Bishop c1 played. This move is slightly inaccurate. The plan that Karpov has is interesting, but it is just not the most accurate. There are options here. Bishop g7 is certainly a possibility. However, the move that Kasparov decided to play is rook c8. This move might seem a little nonsensical, but you have to bear with me now. So he knows that rook d3 is coming, right? He knows that that move is coming. He knows that he can't really stop it, right? If he plays a move like knight b4, then white can just play knight d4, no problem. And he recognizes that, hey, if this knight ever moves, now I might be able to take the pawn on c2, right? I don't have to play bishop g7 straight away. Maybe the bishop on g7 is actually weaker. Maybe if I play bishop g7, black doubles up the rooks on the second file and attacks my pawn, right? So he's being careful. Rook bc8. Rook d3 played by Karpov. The engine suggests moves like d5. These are not at all easy to find, but they exist here. Apparently this move works. Maybe it looks a little ugly with the pawn there, isolated. However, this bishop is extremely passive for the time being. Queen h4 does not work on account of h5, which is very precise. For a human to see this, it's very difficult. It's possible, of course, but you have to see h5, and that's not a walk in the park for everyone. So here, Kasparov plays the natural, knight d4, knight b4. It is a slight mistake, because after rook h3, white does have quite an interesting initiative, but it's hard to blame him here. Bishop g3 played, and here bishop e3. Rook e7. This is an interesting move. So Kasparov realizes that he wants to play f5 at some point, and for that he wants to double rooks on the e file. He considers that to be good. f5 could have been played right now. It could have totally been played. However, after bishop takes b6, where's the queen going, right? It's not too clear. So Kasparov wanted to clear things up before playing this. He plays rook e7. There's no rush anyways. Queen h4 will always be met by knight f8. No problem. So here Kasparov is not very Karpov doesn't know exactly what to play here. It's not a very simple position. He plays king g1. A prophylactic move, just in case anything happens and is the long diagonal, at least his king will be a little bit safer there. Rook ce8 played by him. Again, he's still delaying f5. He has a vision in mind. Rook d1 played. Okay. Now Kasparov decides it is time to play f5. Okay, so if white doesn't play g takes f6, he's gonna be in real trouble here, because e5 is coming after pawn takes. E5 is coming, and with these double rooks, it is quite a threat. So he's basically forced to take here, and this is a very interesting point in the game. There are two options to take. You can take with the bishop, after which white will play the very annoying queen d2, attacking this pawn, and you cannot defend it. You have to look for some counterplay. In this case, e5, the engine finds, but after f5, your king is being exposed. It's not a good situation. So Kasparov had actually calculated that after knight takes f6, even though you give up the b6 pawn, you're in a good situation right here. In this position, you can take on b6, but you will be faced by knight g4, and after bishop takes, king takes, rook takes c7, rook takes, knight takes c2. Despite being a pawn up, white's position does face a few problems, mainly this weak pawn and this weak pawn, right? So you might say, okay, well, I don't know, maybe I play e5, right, to try and exchange things. Rook f8 is a very annoying move. Bishop takes, rook takes, knight c5, rook takes b2, and everything is falling apart, right? White's pieces are just not coordinated enough to deal with all of black's threats in this position. So Karpov notices this and says, okay, I'm going to play rook g3. Bishop takes b6 is still a threat. And guess what? If you want to defend it, you're going to have to play knight d7. But knight d7 is an ugly move that you really don't want to play. So, what Kasparov realizes is that, hey, I can give up the b6 pawn as long as I have enough counterplay to compensate it. So he plays rook f7. A committal move, definitely. Bishop takes b6. Here he realizes that, okay, well, e5 might be coming if I play queen e7. If I play queen e7, there are a lot of moves. Knight a5, for example, is one of them that could worry me. Okay, so he plays queen b8. This is the most natural square for the queen. It's not a big surprise that he plays this. Bishop e3 played, retreating the bishop. a5 might have been a bit more precise, but bishop e3 makes a ton more sense. Knight h5 played, and here Karpov plays rook g4. This is a very interesting position again. So the one with the initiative now is black, and he can play a lot of things. He can play rook e f8. He can play bishop c8 to look for an e5, or he can play d5. Now this move requires a pretty decent amount of calculation, but the idea is pretty simple. I want to open up the position because your king is weaker, because your rook on g4 is horribly uncoordinated, because you have to defend pawns on f4. This move makes sense. It just makes sense. But you have to be precise with your calculation. So after here, you have to take on d5, knight takes d5, e takes d5, and in this position, black threatens d4. If white plays c3, now the knight on b3 is weak, so bishop c8 wins immediately. And knight d4 is faced with bishop c8. Rook goes to h4. And as you can see, white's pieces are horribly uncoordinated. Bishop knight f6 played. And you are threatening g5 in this position. You are threatening knight e4. You are threatening queen takes b2. White simply cannot face with all these threats, cannot deal with them. But again, it's not obvious to see all this. Like, this is not at all obvious to know that, hey, guess what? The rook on h4 is actually super terribly uncoordinated, and because of the weakness on the f4 and because of the weakness on b2, this position is actually almost decisive advantage for black. It's not at all obvious. So it is again understandable that Kasparov would repeat moves, especially since the time control is at move 40. He probably wants more time to think about this position. Here, instead of playing rook g3, for some reason, Karpov decides to play rook h4. This one is weird because he must have seen what was about to come next. Or maybe he didn't. g5, of course. We're looking to open up the file, and it looks devastating initially. F takes g5, and you will think, okay, knight takes e4. The game almost feels over. But hey, guess what? It's not. Because white can just play queen e2, knight takes, b takes, bishop takes, and there are quite a few problems for black here. Mainly his king. His king is without the pawn on without the g pawn, his king feels very much exposed, and this knight that can jump to d4 and start creating problems also becomes a problem. For example, here bishop d4 is a very natural move. Bishop takes d4, knight takes d4. It's not very clear that black has any winning chances, right? g6 can always be sacrificed. This pawn on e6 is a worry, and this knight on b4 is just not doing much, right? So even if white's king is terribly exposed in this position, it doesn't seem very clear. But possibly what Karpov missed in this position is knight g4. This is a tremendous move. It comes out of the blue. You don't expect it, but it removes this strong bishop, and it is white is left with horrible weaknesses. So after this forced sequence, queen b6 is played, and as you can see, white's position is very, very delicate. This knight is weak. This pawn is weak. In turn, this knight is weak. There is no dark square bishop. This rook is sort of uncoordinated. And here, Kasparov plays a very natural move, bishop a8. And maybe you should pause the video right here to give it a think. why this is a mistake and what white should play. So, assuming you've given it a try, the move is queen takes b8, rook takes b8, and then the tremendous bishop h3. You can understand why Kasparov would have missed this move. It really is not at all obvious. It's tremendous, right? It comes out of the blue. Rook takes b3, bishop takes e6. Rook takes b2 is followed by rook f4, and you are losing this rook. And even though you have two minor pieces for the rook, because your king is so weak, this is actually equality. But okay, Karpov evidently did not see that, because to bishop a8 he plays rook takes d6, thinking he's alright. I'm lost here. Rook b7 played, queen takes a6, and here I'm not sure why Kasparov didn't play knight b4. This is clearly the better move, and I don't think it's hard for a player of his level to see. Maybe he got a little confident, right? But as we will see, he shouldn't have. Rook takes b3 played, rook takes e6, and here he plays the blunder, rook takes b2, and incredibly, this is equality right here. What he should have played is something like knight e3, just covering up his squares, attacking the bishop. He's completely won. He's a piece up after all. He plays rook takes b2 and allows queen c4, and this is very dangerous because he's threatening rook e8 mate. So king h8 played, and here Karpov had g6, and after h6, rook takes, queen takes, he simply had knight d1, and it is no longer possible to defend this knight on c2, and with that he would have obtained his equality. However, instead of playing this in probably very dire time trouble, this was after all move 40, he plays e5. Very, very cheeky. Black plays a bad move like knight e3. He will lose immediately to rook takes h7, king takes h7, and g6. Of course, if he plays king h8, queen h4, king g8, queen h7, he will face tremendous problems. Here he has nowhere to escape. He has to play king takes, and after queen takes g7, he will be losing shortly. And if instead of running to h8 he runs to g8, well, it's simply mating 1 with rook takes c8. But of course, Kasparov, he's sharp, he's really good tactically. He immediately saw this threat and said, nope, I'm gonna play queen a7. And after king h1, bishop takes g2, king takes g2, he plays knight d4. The next move, he's gonna be winning this rook. He will be a piece and a rook up for 3 pawns, and in this position, Karpov decided it was time and he resigned. So, what did we learn from this extremely complicated game? Well, mainly it is the ideas of Najdorf. So, for starters, most Najdorfs you encounter aren't played with a4, right? But if you play the Najdorf, you have surely encountered people who try to play a4. And the point of a4 is to play a5, so you want to avoid that, which is why here the move is b6 or knight c6. And black's plan normally is to play bishop d7, knight takes b4, and then bishop c6. That is his normal plan. White tries to avoid that by playing knight b3 at some point, in which case our bishop is now misplaced and it doesn't belong there anymore. We play b6 and we retreat it back. By retreating, we also give space for the knight. And here, even though it looks very scary for black, right, all those pawns in front of the king, we must remember that white is not doing this without concessions, right? He's conceding the long diagonal. This is dangerous. And we have counterplay with d5 at some point. We might have f5 at some point. And I think Kasparov played this very interestingly. He said, okay, I'm going to play bishop f8. I'm going to keep things calm. Now, had white played h4, this would have been a different story. I'm not saying that black is lost. By no means is he lost in this position. He actually has a ton of options. Knight c5 being one of them. h5, knight takes. And okay, now we have a little bit of counterplay. We can play d5. Necessary, by the way. It is necessary to try and make some counterplay, because If we do nothing, again, white simply has more space and will suffocate us. Takes, takes, knight takes, and queen d7. Again, this is a computer line. However, you will find your chances during the game. Right here, we're trying to use the fact that white has weakened his position so much to leverage the pawn that we just sacrificed, right? This pawn is also weak. It is expected that we have counterplay in this position. If white gets too greedy and takes here, we will simply play this. And after queen takes, after king g1, sorry, we have many ways to attack him, and now it is us who is attacking the white king, not the other way around. So I hope this video helped you learn a thing or two about the Najdorf. It is a very complicated opening with a lot of small little details, but it is interesting to see how the position progresses, how black stays completely in the first 3 ranks, and it is okay because white is weakening himself. Had white not weakened himself, say he plays something like queen f2, we also have our options here. We have knight b4, for example. As we stated earlier, the move a4 comes with its weaknesses, mainly b4. Okay, white plays normal, rook a d1. We play normal, b5. a5, we play rook bc8, and it's not clear how white is going to progress. If he decides to now play this move, we will simply play d5. And now we're not even losing a pawn, because after takes, knight f takes, knight takes, knight takes. If he takes with the bishop, he weakens his position way too much. He weakens his position way too much. He cannot give up this bishop. And if he doesn't, well, I'm going to either take this bishop or I'm going to take this pawn. So there are options. There are always options in the Najdorf. I hope you found this video informative. See you in the next one.